Some time ago, I remember asking someone about a troubling noise coming from their car's engine. How long has it been making that noise? I asked them. A few weeks, they answered. And so I asked if anyone has taken a look at it. No, they said. I just thought if I ignore it, it'll eventually go away by itself. Now, some of us do this with our health and our bodies, don't we? We have a new ache or a new pain, but instead of going to the doctor, we hope that the pain will fix itself. Truth be told, there are some things that won't fix themselves. They need someone to come and do the fixing. There are some things in life that will not fix themselves. They need someone to come and do the fixing. This is true even for religion. Judaic religion, according to this passage, was falling apart. The Judaic religion of Jesus' day had been falling apart. As we heard last week, Jesus lamented that the old Jewish religion, which refused to acknowledge him and his mission to save God's people, was a dying religion, if not dead already. He did this by comparing the religion to a fig tree planted in God's vineyard. And when he came to seek fruit on it, he found none. As Jesus saw things, first century Judaism was standing with 1 foot in the grave. And in this series in which we've been exploring Jesus' life through the eyes of Luke, there have been repeated examples of this dying, if not dead already, religion, especially in the way that they refuse to acknowledge Jesus and his mission to save God's people. Once, they tried to throw Jesus off a cliff. At other times, they charged Jesus with blasphemy and said that his moral compass was way off. Then in Luke chapter 6, there's almost a mirror image, a repeat of our passage that we read this morning. There in Luke chapter 6, we read, on another Sabbath, Jesus entered the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was withered. Then Jesus said to him, stretch out your hand, and he did so, and his hand was restored. But the religious leaders were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. You know, in some ways, these two passages give us a glimpse at the beginnings and the tail end of Jesus' miracles on the Sabbath. Luke chapter 6 gives us a view of the beginnings of Jesus' miracles on the Sabbath, and Luke chapter 13 and a little bit in chapter 14 show us the tail end of his healings and miracles on the Sabbath. Both these passages took place on a Sabbath. Both took place in a synagogue. Both times Jesus was teaching. Both times there was a physical healing involved. And both resulted in Jewish leaders being very agitated at Jesus. And so we're left asking, from that first Sabbath healing where Jesus healed the man with the withered hand, to this Sabbath where Jesus healed the woman's crooked posture, did the Jewish religion show any sign of fixing itself? Did anywhere along the line between those two events, between those two Sabbaths, did the religion show any sign of fixing itself? Were they any warmer to the idea of accepting Jesus and his mission to save God's people? Or were they driving along hoping that the engine noise of their religion would just go away by itself? This is what I want to explore and answer today. So as we know, the text unfolds on a Sabbath day. People had gathered to worship God in their Jewish synagogue, something that we could think of as a church or church building. And again, there were some people, or there was someone there with a physical problem, as we read in verse 11. And there was a woman who had had a disabling spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not fully straighten herself. You know, there's not much detail for us to go on here, but we can imagine this woman with her very distinct posture as she walked into the synagogue Sabbath by Sabbath. A spine that cannot straighten, and bones that were just fixed into their position now, and muscles that had been stretched into place. And this for 18 long years. This was a hard affliction. And I don't mean to make light of it at all, but I'm in my 40s now. And some pains and aches are creeping into my body. Too much heavy lifting does something to my right arm. Too much time spent bent in one position makes my back sore when I stand up too fast. And all of that is absolutely trivial compared to what this woman had to deal with for 18 years. All my aches and pains combined is absolutely trivial compared to what she endured for 18 years. And putting it like this makes it all the more impressive that she made her way to church. Doesn't that strike you as very impressive? She is in much discomfort. Everyone looks when she enters the building, and she's there. She's making her way to church. Even in her affliction, she desired to meet with God and His people. And even though her body was not what she might desire it to be, her spirit, her inner world, was alive and well when she heard about God's goodness and His faithfulness and His love for the broken-bodied and the broken-hearted. Yet her problem was more than a physical problem, wasn't it? Something that, we could fix in modern times with a bit of corrective surgery. Her problem was more than that. Though she had a physical symptom, there was something spiritual layered underneath it. It was caused by a disabling spirit, Luke told us. And Jesus confirmed that it was in fact Satan who bound her in this physical posture for 18 years. And I bring this up for two reasons. One is that we do need to be careful. We do need to be careful not to completely ignore spiritual realities which may accompany physical afflictions. Gosh, it's easy to do as a Westerner, isn't it? With so much medicine and intervention at our disposal. But missionaries, especially on the frontiers of gospel advancement among unreached people and nations, would routinely confirm this for you, that there is often a spiritual element underlying physical conditions. On the other hand, we must be very careful not to assess every physical affliction as something spiritual. Not every headache is a devil. Not every misformed part of the human body is the work of a demon. But of this connection between the physical and spiritual realities, and especially our temptation to fall into a ditch on either side, either dismissing all spiritual meddling or overplaying spiritual meddling, the insight of C.S. Lewis is tremendously helpful, very helpful to help us navigate this. In his preface to the Screwtape Letters, he wrote, "There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve their existence. The other is to believe and feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them." And this text that we just read helps us to avoid these two equal and opposite errors. It shows us there is sometimes, and I do mean to emphasize it, that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a spiritual reality is layered underneath a physical affliction. One can affect the other. Sometimes. And this is where we need to be thinking. Even so, this woman had been carrying this burden for 18 long years, and though she was physically afflicted by this devil, she remained determined. She's not afflicted to a point that she's possessed in that sense. She's just afflicted by this physical deformity. And yet she is determined. She wanted to remain among God's people in His church, to worship Him and to hear of His goodness and His faithfulness. She is there ready to worship in spite of her affliction. And this is where everything gets spicy. Look at verse 12 with me. When Jesus saw her, He called her over and said to her, "Woman, you are freed from your disability." And Jesus' words there are arresting and interesting, aren't they? It was an immediate reality. As soon as He speaks the word, it is real. There's no waiting, there's no second guessing, there's no strain, there's no spells that He has to cast. None of that. It's just a declarative word, and immediately it is a reality. But what does that mean? What does it mean for Jesus to do this, where everyone can see that He has done this? You know, in previous messages, I have talked about miracles and what they are designed to prove. What is the point of a miracle? And I've said that miracles do a number of things. They do things like confirm Jesus' divinity and His absolute authority over everything physical and spiritual, over everything seen and unseen. It is His absolute claim over every square inch of the universe. But let me just say here that this miracle proves, if nothing else, that Jesus came to take away Satan's dominion and his meddling interference. Jesus came to take away Satan's dominion and his meddling interference. That Jesus had come, to quote the scriptures, to destroy the works of the devil. And this is exactly what happened here. By freeing the woman from her affliction, Jesus destroyed a work of the devil on the Sabbath. On the Sabbath. And that's the problem. That's the problem. Look at verse 14 with me. But the ruler of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to the people, "There are 6 days in which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, not on the Sabbath day." You know, the contrast in responses is so sharp, isn't it? If you're looking at the contrast in responses between this woman and the synagogue leader, it's a very sharp contrast. The healed woman had come to church on the Sabbath, perhaps not even expecting to be healed, but simply to encourage her heart in God's goodness and His faithfulness. And she finds her healing at the hands of Jesus and then glorified God because of it. It's the best Sabbath that she had ever known. Think about what that would be like to suffer from something for 18 years. You go to church, Jesus heals you. Wouldn't that be the best Sabbath of your life? The church leader, on the other hand, the synagogue leader, was furious. Why? On the face of it, he's not against Jesus doing a good thing to the glory of God. He's against Jesus doing a good thing to the glory of God on the Sabbath, which had become the ultimate no-no in Judaic religion. We have known this from previous sermons, and we see it again here, this no-knowing attitude of the leaders to stop anyone from doing good things for other people, merciful things for other people on the Sabbath. And that means nothing has changed. The synagogue hasn't changed. The religious leaders have not changed. It was the same old, dying and dead religion which would not acknowledge Jesus and His mission to save God's people. It was the same old. It was a religion that could not and would not fix itself. But what was it about doing a good work to the glory of God on the Sabbath that got under His skin? Well, the Sabbath day was marked out as a full day of devotion to God. And God Himself set this pattern. He set a good pattern for His people, working 6 days in the Garden of Eden and then resting. And then God enshrined this in His moral law, saying 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. It's not an unreasonable pattern, is it? Where the Lord says, look, work for 6 days and then rest in me. It's a good pattern. It is for our good. And this was essentially at the root of the synagogue leader's problem with Jesus. He was being hyper-vigilant about this Sabbath command, telling Jesus, you have 6 days to work your miracles. You have 6 days to work your miracles. But don't come here on the Sabbath, on the day which no work is to be done, and work your miracles on this day. You got 6 days to choose from. Work your miracles then, but not now, not here, not on the Sabbath. You can see how the synagogue leader approached the Sabbath like a policeman. What a strange fellow to be around, wouldn't you think? Approaching the Sabbath like a policeman, following a strict code of enforcing what people can't do on the Sabbath, rather than giving thought to what people might enjoy on the Sabbath, like a miracle from God. And that is a crucial difference. To approach a Sabbath, your mind loaded with the question on things, what can't I do today? Instead of being spring-loaded with the question of what do I get to enjoy today? There is a world of difference in that question of how we approach the Sabbath. One document regulating the Sabbath from around the time of Jesus gave this detailed outline of 39 things. They loved 39s. It's always 40 less 1 in the Jewish religion, isn't it? That they have these 39 things that you cannot do on the Sabbath. They're not found in the Bible, incidentally, but they are a guideline that they created for themselves. That included things like sowing and plowing and reaping and binding sheaves and threshing and winnowing and selecting and grinding and sifting and kneading and baking and so on and so on and so on. It just went on and on and on. It even got down to really weird details, like how many alphabetic letters you could write on a Sabbath before violating God's Sabbath command. There's no way you would be doing a word puzzle on the Sabbath. They've said 2 letters and you'd be violating against the Sabbath command. You could write 1 letter but not 2. And if you found 2 letters written, you couldn't erase one and then write another one in its place because that would count as 2. It was really detailed stuff. And all this to say, the whole enterprise of the Judaic religion, no matter how biblical it once was, could not and would not fix itself. By its continued refusal to acknowledge Jesus and his mission to save God's people, it had become barnacled and misguided about its once noble purpose, which was to offer people the opportunity to worship and rest themselves in the goodness and faithfulness of God. A once noble purpose, a once good for the world purpose, had become barnacled and misguided by the time Jesus addressed it. Now, the ruler of the synagogue could not see this tragedy. He could not see what was happening under his own nose, that his religion was dying under his own watch. So dead was his religion that it barked at Jesus for making a woman well. Clearly, nothing had changed since Jesus first healed in a synagogue on the Sabbath. Nothing had changed. Nothing had caused them to have a rethink about, maybe we are getting the Sabbath wrong. Maybe this is not what God meant for it. To just chase people, telling them what they cannot do today. Nothing has changed. There too, the leaders took a bite at Jesus because they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. And perhaps like the owner of the fig tree, as we mentioned before, Jesus exercises even more patience before he removes the Judaic religion from God's vineyard. It's just a bit more patience. A bit more patience. And he offers them a fresh opportunity to pull out of their death spiral. And this opportunity came by way of Jesus pointing out one of their glaring inconsistencies. You leaders, you synagogue leaders who love these details about the law, about what you can and cannot do. Look at this detail. Look at this aspect of the law that you got completely bundled up wrong. You've bungled it completely. He said the leaders were hyper-vigilant and strict to police the Sabbath, making sure that no one did anything which could be classed as work. They were very good at that. But even they made exceptions for themselves. Even they would make exceptions. If they owned livestock, they would dutifully work in order to provide water for their animals. Can't do any work on the Sabbath. But I will make an exception. I have a donkey, a goat, a sheep, an ox. I have something that needs water, so I'll work to make sure that they have water. Verse 15, you hypocrites. You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to water it. And Jesus' point is clinical, isn't it? If they could show dutiful care for animals on the Sabbath, why in the world are they upset when Jesus shows God's care for people on the Sabbath? You know, if they could show care for animals on the Sabbath, why in the world are they upset that God shows his care for people on the Sabbath? That sounds like a fire alarm. We haven't got long to go. But let's be honest. To treat animals better than people is horribly cruel, isn't it? To treat an animal better than what you would treat a person is horribly cruel. But more importantly, it's also a hard violation against God's purpose for the Sabbath. And Jesus brings this out in verse 16 where he said, "Ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath?" So we have been saying that this incident where the synagogue leader had reprimanded Jesus for making a woman well on the Sabbath day was a hard violation against God's purpose for the Sabbath itself. And Jesus brought this out for us in verse 16 where he said, ought not this woman to be whom Satan had bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day. And we're saying Jesus is saying something very forcefully here. He's not just pitching them a reciprocal question like, don't you think this is a good idea that this woman be made well on the Sabbath day? He's really putting it to them. Is it not entirely necessary that this is absolutely the right day for this kind of thing to happen? And it is such a wonderfully unapologetic statement by Jesus. Ought not this woman? It's so unapologetic from Jesus. And he cushions nothing in diplomatic language at all. He's not trying to soften his blow. He's not saying, you're right, really sorry for stepping over your Sabbath lines this day. I'll keep that in mind for next week. I'll behave better next time I come to the synagogue. No, he's not saying anything of the kind. Instead, Jesus goes all out, saying that what I did in freeing this woman from the tyranny of Satan and the tyranny of your dead and dying religion is exactly the type of freedom that the Sabbath was made for. It is exactly right that I should do this, not on any other day, but on the Sabbath. In his hyper-vigilant policing of the Sabbath, the synagogue leader forgot all about this aspect of freedom that the Sabbath was made for. That the Sabbath was precisely the kind of day to remember both the spiritual and physical freedom and to rest in the goodness and faithfulness of God. That's the premise on which God gave the Sabbath to his people. He said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery where you enjoyed no Sabbath whatsoever. Therefore, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. I'm the Lord your God who set you free. So remember the Sabbath. Where God gifted the Sabbath as an opportunity for holy worship and hearty rest, the synagogue leader turned it into an opportunity to police and ticket people, Jesus included, for arbitrary infractions. Such a religion was clearly in a death spiral. It could not and would not fix itself. It needed an overhaul, beginning with acknowledging Jesus and his mission to save God's people. And this leaves us with just a few questions before we close. Have we learnt anything from Jesus over the years? Has anything changed for you? Is your first thoughts about the Sabbath what people can't do, rather than the freedom we get to enjoy? Freedom from the tyranny of Satan, and certainly freedom from the tyranny of a dying religion. The Sabbath was made and gifted to you as an opportunity to worship and to rest in the goodness and the faithfulness of God, seen in your acknowledgement of Jesus and his lively mission to save you. Let me close there. Let me pray for us, and then we will sing once more.